So welcome everyone to the Bytes of Intelligence podcast. Today it's my honor to welcome Mr. Jan Olsson. Is that the right pronunciation?
Jan Olsson.
Jan
yes.
Olsson. Brilliant. We're very lucky to have him here. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us on this podcast.
Thank you. It's great being here at Imperial today.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I guess the first question I just wanted to start with was, can you please share your journey of how you first got interested in finance? Were there any pivotal moments or people who inspired you early on when you were a child?
First of all, I think a lot of the schooling in terms of finance was at an early age. Normally it comes later, but in my case it was an early age. I went to many schools around the world and learned many languages, and then I thought about my next career moves. And then I thought maybe I should study medicine. And then when I was sort of 14 or 15, my path changed because I noticed that I could use my languages and possibly generate business through finance. That's a way, that was a very simple argument. So it was quite simple. And then I developed those thoughts. And then when I graduated from high school in Switzerland, I went to high school in Lugano, Switzerland, that's the Swiss-Italian part. I decided to move on to the States and start university there. So I started at Pomona College in Los Angeles, or in Claremont, which is Los Angeles County. And then I studied there economics, and that's where my real interest for finance started. And then from there I moved to the London School of Economics. Then I worked for 2 or 3 years. And then I started at the Wharton Business School, and I did something called also the Lauder Institute at the University of Pennsylvania. So I have multiple degrees, and that prepared me well for the finance world.
Oh, wow. Brilliant. What a journey.
Yeah.
I guess I just want to pick up on that first thing you said. So you said you speak many languages. I think I read you worked in 11 countries and you speak 5 languages. Firstly, what are those 5 languages?
I speak German, Swedish, French, Italian, and English, and then I speak bits and pieces of a few others. So that's the way.
Wow.
So it was confusing. I grew up in 11 countries, or in many countries, and it was a lot of back and forth between languages, and that was, of course, also an opportunity, but there were also challenges in terms of that.
Definitely. Did you find it hard to kind of settle into each of these places as you moved, or was it quite natural to you?
Yeah, it became quite natural because I did it since I was a child.
Right.
And so there's definitely a difficulty and a challenge there. And the challenge is it's always a new environment, always a new language, but not only that, it's also a new culture. And you define friendships and what you learn at school very differently. In some countries, the school is more advanced in certain subjects, and then maybe a little bit more backwards in others. And that was very difficult to adjust to that.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine because, each of these countries you lived in, were they all European countries?
No, many others too.
Many others,
so
okay.
Outside too. And that made me, I could adapt very easily to different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds, and I became a very open-minded person because you cannot move around like this Definitely. And not be an open-minded person.
Absolutely. You kind of have to move and adapt to the different environments as you go.
Yeah, and you have to accept different environments. What's true in one society might be different in another, and you learn that. You learn to adapt very quickly because the society will not adapt to you. You have to adapt to society. And with society, I mean the local environment or the geographic environment that I'm in at that point in time.
Oh, I really like that. I think what you said about you have to adapt to society is quite crucial. And how did you apply this, all these skills that you learned by living in different countries? Did that help you in business or leadership, looking back on it?
The first thing you learn is that you have to be flexible. So I'm extremely flexible. So you cannot have a set rhythm in terms of your journey. You learn that everything is slightly different in different societies. And you have to use that flexibility to adapt. So what I don't have sort of the belief that there's one truth in one society. There are several truths, and you have to adapt to that, because if you don't do that, you're an outsider. And my parents were always very prone that we learn the local language, because without learning the local language, it's very difficult to adapt. Of course, a lot of people speak English now around the world.
Sure.
And you could get by with English, but on the other hand, we went often to local schools and a local environment, and that helped me immensely to learn the local languages and adapt. It was much easier if you spoke the language, also in small little things, the daily things.
I can imagine. I can imagine that being really useful now, because you obviously have to work with different clients.
Yeah.
So you're able to adapt and kind of speak their language,
Yeah.
even if it's English, but speak and imagine their situation, put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah, I often put myself in the shoes of the client, and I notice that sometimes it's difficult, that certain individuals have difficulties in terms of adapting. And I put myself in the shoes of the client, and then I try to adapt. And this was very much the case when I came back, when I was 18 years old. 21. I came back to my one of my home countries, because I have many home countries, but Sweden is my home country.
Right.
And I came back there, I speak the language and so on. And then I decided, whilst I'm looking for a job, I just finished university, or the first stage of university, and I was supposed to be there for maybe 1 or 2 years. And I found a job to sell sewing machines for a local company, door to door. So that was quite an experience, because then I came into a completely different environment. I'd been in a very much an academic environment, and suddenly I was thrown into this job. And in this job, there were people from employees from all kinds of backgrounds. And the training course was just a few days. You learned it very quickly. And the first thing you learn in that course is the fear of contacting another person, i.e. a client. Because at that time, we knocked on doors and found our clients by knocking on doors.
Wow.
And there's an enormous fear hurdle you have to get.
Definitely.
And you have to sort of surpass to actually knock on the door. And then actually when the door opens, it's a moment of truth, because you learn once the door shuts, there will never be a deal.
Definitely.
So you have to make sure that you sort of you deal with the fear element, and then when the moment of truth comes, the door opens, you have to make sure that doesn't shut. So a lot of small little things I learned, but I see them in everyday life right now. I see the fear of contacting clients. I see the fear of pitching a deal when you're in front of a client, and how to conclude. So all these simple little things I learned. And the interesting aspect was, when I started that job, people came from all kinds of backgrounds. There was hardly anybody who had my type of background, or nobody, I would say. And there were all kinds of levels, and you sort of, there was only one level.
Right.
It was, how many sewing machines did you sell at the end of the week? Okay, that was the only level.
Everyone's equal.
So everybody's equal. And that was very difficult to adapt and to sort of get into that environment. So that was virtually my first work experience. Not summer job, but this was my first sort of
real life
where I worked for many months.
That's incredible. I find that really interesting, because I was going to come on to that and ask about your first job, but I think this is your first real world experience of kind of contacting and speaking to people. Because I think right now with social media, even let's say I started a business, that element of going up and knocking on people's doors is quite unique. It's not as easy to find nowadays, because people might think, I'll just put a post on Instagram or Facebook.
And you learn one thing: you never have perfect information. You don't have perfect information which door opens. You don't have perfect information about the area where you sell the machines at that time, or you don't have perfect information about the product. Definitely. I was not very strong on in fact, I don't know how to sew. So,
wow,
so that's
incredible.
So you learn a lot of things, and but the easiest way to not make that client call is to say we don't have perfect information, because you never have perfect information. Right. So when junior people come into our office nowadays, I say you will never have perfect information, because by the time you have it, the information has moved. Yeah,
that's very true.
Yeah.
It brings me to one thing, an experience I did last year, which was at Imperial. There's a competition called Imperial Jailbreak, where it's a competition where you're given 36 hours to travel as far as you can from the Imperial campus in South Kensington, and you can't use any of your own money. So that's the challenge. And my friend and I, we took part in this competition, and we ended up raising enough money to get a flight to Cyprus and back without using a single penny of our own. But that idea of going up to, we spoke to maybe 200-300 people on the streets of London, just kind of approaching them with kind of no fear, as it were. At the start, it was quite scary. But that idea of just speaking to people, you don't know if that person's going to help or not, but just trying it out, not sure where the conversation's going to go.
Yeah.
I think that kind of resonates slightly to your first experiences of knocking on people's doors and selling sewing machines.
Yeah, and that's also the fear of getting a no, because you always want yes. It's easy to deal with success. It's much more difficult to deal with failure.
Definitely. I think initially my friend and I, we were scared of getting that no, because we thought, should we ask this person? Because I think there's a high chance they might say no. But once we got over that initial fear of a no is literally just one person's not able to help, let's move on to the next, that mindset shift really helped, because it meant that we were kind of looking forward to the no as well. It was still a reaction or a conversation to have with someone.
It's actually quite true. And the way it works is the harder you try, the luckier you are. And It is really that the effort you put in, it shows how much you sell or what the result is and so on. So that's very, very important in my opinion.
That quote you just said, the harder you try, the luckier you get. Could you expand on that? Because I remember the talk you gave a few days ago at Imperial, people at the end were asking, how can we put myself in the best position for this or this job? And you said, many times it's luck, but I think you can manifest your luck by trying harder.
Yeah, I think in terms of career, of course you have set goals, because that's important to know where you're traveling. But within those set goals, you need to be flexible, because we discussed careers there. And in terms of having one set company or one set job might lead to disappointments, and it narrows it down to possibly that there is a failure. So if you spread the risk, it's much, much easier, and the failure rate might go down. So the harder you try, that's the better it gets, and the luckier you are, because you have more opportunities then. That's my view. So what my view is, if you look for a job, or when you graduate from a university like Imperial, it's important that you try many avenues, many companies, because you might be set on one because you're there's some peer pressure, you have to work for that company or the other company. But I wouldn't listen to that. I think peer pressure is very dangerous, because it sort of puts you down one avenue, maybe, because it might be the avenue which other people think is the right one for you, which is the right one for them. So I think you need to have your own opinion. You need to analyze your strengths and weaknesses, and then work with those and try to find the opportunity. But the biggest advice is, don't try just one opportunity. Look at many opportunities, and then something might fall down, and be positive.
That's great advice. I think, the key point is trying to keep a wide range of things you can apply for, so you're not limiting yourself.
Yeah.
I just had a question to do with this topic. So there's many students at Imperial, which, at least when I found, when you enter, they're already applying for spring weeks, or they're already applying for summer internships, and they're already applying for the next big thing. So you always feel that kind of pressure. Did you ever experience imposter syndrome anywhere in your career? And how would you deal with that if you did?
It's very difficult, that type of pressure that you're talking about. You come in here, and there's always some group that are the best in class, that know the answer, that know the career path. And they have there are different age groups coming in, different backgrounds, and there's always somebody who knows more. And normally there's a group that forms sort of a leadership group at a university. It was, in my case, it's here at Imperial, it's everywhere. And these individuals decide what the career path should be.
For the whole cohort.
Exactly, for the whole cohort. So certain companies that people might not have heard about suddenly get a lot of applications, because that's right now the in topic or the in company. I think that's the wrong path people should take. You should think about your own path. And then, by the way, many of the companies that were great when I studied at Wharton, for example, just to take one university, they might not exist anymore. Sure. They might have been bought up by other companies. There might have been liquidation cases, bankruptcies, and so on and so forth. So things change very quickly. So what's good right now might not be good in the future, or might not be the right move for the future. So the biggest advice is never listen to your peers. What I mean by that, you can take advice and everything, but go your own path. Analyze your strengths and weaknesses, and also try to find a career path that suits your interests and your strengths. Because most of the time when you listen to others, There's a lot of pressure, by the way, also from families and so on. Sure. When I started university, there were a lot of people, including myself, who had sort of defined career paths because of family pressure, family influence, and so on. I think that needs to be cut out somewhat, and you need to think for yourself when you're at university, and you see that very quickly. Where do you excel? Where don't you excel? Because everybody's different, and there's strengths and weaknesses with everybody. Some people might be very strong analytically. Other people might be more marketing orientated. Other people might be more sportive. It depends what you are, and then take all those strengths that you have and try to put them into work. And also try to find something that's fun. You don't want to go to work because your peers have told you this is a good job, and then you don't like that type of work. So it's very, very difficult to resist this pressure. And you mentioned it, that you have it here at Imperial, but it exists everywhere.
Right.
And by the way, these people who give you the advice as the peers now that sort of set the standard, they might end up completely differently. And when I see where these people ended up that set the standard, that might be somewhere where I didn't want to go.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really useful. Yeah. Thank you for that. Just as you mentioned, having a job that you're kind of interested in and you genuinely enjoy going, I wanted to ask, so as a CEO of the Deutsche Bank Nordic regions, if you had to describe your role in maybe 1 or 2 sentences, what would that be?
Yeah, well, first of all, the role changes, and a company like Deutsche, or a financial institution like Deutsche Bank, changes very much. So the job changes over time, the type of clients you have, the type of business you do, and so on and so forth. But a regular job on my side is I'm on the sort of coverage side, the marketing side. So I have quite a large client list, and I try to be in front of these clients quite often, regularly. So that's a little bit my day, to simplify it. Other people have a completely different day, but I try to put my strength in front of the client, try to initiate ideas, create situations, and then develop them, and then sort of in a team, obviously.
Wow. And what's one of the most memorable moments in your career, if you could name one?
There are many. There's not one.
Sure.
Of course, in a career, there are so many. It's every day there's a memorable moment. But here again, I think I want to give some pieces of advice.
Sure, please.
When I started working, there was, of course, also a group of individuals who knew a lot, who knew more than myself and knew more than many others. And they set the standard of which clients we should look at and which clients we should form a relationship with. And at the time, as a young person, I worked in many areas, in corporate finance and in strategy departments and so on. But then at some point, I came back to the Nordic region and just entered that. So I'd already been at Deutsche quite a long time, and then I decided that I should focus on the Nordic region. And so one of my first impressions of the region was that everything was set in terms of this client is a good one, this client is not so good. There was a hierarchy.
Right.
And I developed a relationship, and I can say this publicly because it's a public situation and well known. I developed a relationship with a truck company called Scania at the time. And that was not the flavor of an investment bank, because not much had happened there. It was a company that had always gone the organic growth route and so on and so forth. So it was not of interest. So I decided to start visiting the CEO at the time, who became a close friend of mine. And nobody really wanted to join that because these meetings, because it was perceived that there would not be much M&A business, this investment banking type of business. Nevertheless, a year after this first visit, and I'd visited him several times, there was a bid by VW, and then came many bids, if you read about it, from Porsche, MAN, and many others. So this became a very large relationship for Deutsche Bank. So my point is, never listen to your peer group, learn from them, take it in, but a truth is not always a truth. There's always a new versions, way, and things change. And this is a little bit my upbringing. I told you the flexibility, because this is where I learned that what other people think and so on, there might be another answer, and that's so important. So always test the environment with your own thoughts. You should not be, there's always a question how much you can test it, but be yourself and try to develop your thoughts. That's what I would advise people to do.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really find that interesting because, there's so many times where you want to do something within you, but you kind of look around and think maybe this is not the best way because you haven't seen many case studies of it working. But I think your advice is trust your instincts, and normally if you work hard and you kind of persevere, something good will work out for you eventually.
Yeah, and believe in your values and your strengths, and believe in what you do, and try to challenge the environment. Not a hard challenge, but challenge with the means you have, and try to develop, in this case, business.
Brilliant. Looking back, what would you say to your younger self or what advice would you give to your younger self if you had to change something about how you kind of grew in Deutsche Bank or your career generally?
I think that a lot of career paths are standard. You do 2 years this, then you get promoted, then it's 3 years another level, and then 3 years another level. And that's fine, and that's important in a large company. But I still believe that you need flexibility. Sometimes you need to take individuals that have had a different path because they can come in with some new ideas and few new thoughts. That is important. So I think it is very, very good to recruit people also from the outside. Have a core, but also recruit some people from the outside, because along the lines, they come with new ideas and also challenge the system. But I think that's important. So I'm not so set on this. I know that all our HR advisors, everybody says you have to do this, that, and then go there and so on. But I believe also that there's something to be said about flexibility and changing the career path. It's sometimes very hard to move from corporate finance to private wealth, from private wealth to asset management. I don't see these steps as revolutionary, and I see that we can learn from each other.
Wow, that's really interesting because I agree. I think many times you're told that this is a set pattern that people take in finance or technology or whatever field it might be, that you have to do this, then you go to here, then you move to partner level, then you move to this level. But I think what you're saying is you can sometimes challenge that and kind of mold it to suit your strengths and your weaknesses or what you're interested in at that time.
Absolutely. I think that a company should maintain some flexibility. Of course, I understand if you're a large company, it is very, very difficult to sort of be too flexible. I understand that because you need a standard.
Yeah.
But also, so people often ask me to rank an individual, like yourself, for example. Okay. And I say, it depends, what ranking system do you use? Is it analytical skills? Is it this type of skill or that type of skill? Because everybody has a different skill and background. And a marketing person is very different from an equity capital markets person, maybe day-to-day equity capital markets person. And that might be, and there might be difference with debt capital markets and with all the other divisions. So it depends how you rank an individual and what criteria you use. That's very, very important.
Right. That's really interesting. I wanted to ask a few questions about the actual finance world, if that's okay. So the first question I just had was, with the rise of Fintech and all these digital currencies such as blockchain, what do you think the role of traditional banks will look like in the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
So I think banks have been around for several hundred years or more than that. And we go back to the Fuggers in Germany and many others. So they've been around for a long time. And banks will continue to be around. They adapt very quickly. And there have always been new developments in banking and finance over a long period of time. There's never been a period without new developments, even in the old times.
Definitely.
So what we're seeing today, the banks will adapt, believe me. And
they will find it before.
Yeah. And there will be challengers, and some of these challenges will be very successful, and that's good news. But the banks will also be able to challenge the system because they're very strong. They have some very competent people, and they will adapt to the environment. These are very, very flexible, and it's in any sort of vertical of society that will happen.
Definitely. Do you think that blockchains could come to a point where they're as ubiquitous as banks are?
I think blockchain is a very important development. I know it's been criticized a lot, and I read a lot about it. And of course, I see it every day. It's in the everyday environment. I think it's something that will stay here. It's not going to move away. And you see the sheer volumes, and it's increasing rapidly. So despite all the criticism and all the issues, I believe the blockchain market will adapt to our market environment with regulation and so on, and it is there to stay.
Okay, brilliant. So see, I think what you're saying is there might be a future where both of these kind of technologies are working together. So there's blockchain and there's traditional banks, but they're going to find a way to kind of work with each other.
Yeah. For example, the stock market has certain opening hours. Blockchain works all the time. You can get a Bitcoin price, as I take Bitcoin as an example, all the time, 24 hours. And so there are advantages. And I'm not saying, I'm not sort of a fan for this or that or trying to make a case for one against the other. I'm just saying blockchain is there to stay, and it will be part of our society if we like it or not. And you see the sheer volumes that are out there, and it will continue to be successful in terms of volume increases and so on.
Right. Because I think right now, from what I understand, is that the key challenges of Bitcoin or any other digital currency is that it's hard to translate that into real fiat money or real world value. So recently I've been reading about there's some other companies coming up like Stellar or Soroban, these digital currencies, which not many people have heard about. But I think what they're trying to tackle is how can we convert and kind of work, how can we convert these digital currencies into fiat money really quickly and instantly? So that means that you can maybe buy your bread and your milk using digital currencies, because that's currently why traditional banks are so powerful that, you know, it's easy and it's everywhere.
Yeah, but what will happen here is that the blockchain, I call it blockchain market or Bitcoin market, just to put it as a sort of, just put a name on it. It will be more regulated in the future, much more regulated.
Right.
And then at some point, I believe we will be seeing it as a currency of some form. Definitely, it is already in some form. And of course, there are specialized financial institutions that deal in the conversion right now from one currency into, for example, another currency. So it already exists, but it's of course limited, and it's still not a currency that's used in everyday life.
Exactly.
If I put it very simple, I try to simplify because some people would challenge me on that. They would say it's already in use, but my view is it will become more regulated, and that's and every sort of with the passing of time, it will be more accepted.
Okay.
And I know it's very, I have to say, it's challenged by many individuals in my sort of sector, in my specific sector, but I just see you cannot stop it. I just see the sheer volume when I go out there. If you go to a conference or something, you just see that it gets more and more, sort of more and more individuals, more and more people are around the blockchain.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many kind of just yearly developments in this field that it's kind of inevitable, I think, for some developments to actually make it through to this market.
Yeah, and you know, all new developments are always criticized in the beginning.
Exactly.
And there are lots of challenges to them. But then they adapt through regulation and other mechanisms and become the mainstream.
Definitely.
And it's still far away before the blockchain is mainstream, but we will see that, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. So another question I had was, you've had lots of experience with the Nordic countries, and I've read that the Nordic countries have a key focus on sustainability. So how do you see this influencing, or how have you seen this influencing kind of strategic decisions, maybe in your role or across different roles, that combination of sustainability and finance?
First of all, many regions have leadership roles. The Nordic region has, I wouldn't say leadership role, but it's very advanced in the sustainability sector.
Right.
And we have some very large renewables companies in the Nordic region, and they've been very, very successful over the past year. And then there have been many products that have come out of these companies that are globally accepted right now. So that's one aspect of it. I still find, though, that when we go and speak to these companies, speak with investors, that it's very interesting to talk sustainability. ESG is a huge aspect that will never go away. In fact, it will become more and more important. But I still find when we discuss specific projects and so on, the investors are still sometimes reluctant to go into the project. And this is because it's, I wouldn't say it's a new science or it's not a new development, but it's just something that's developing in terms of the investor community. And then also it's important that these companies and projects are profitable in the long run and not supported, maybe initially supported by government funds, but ultimately I think it's important that they are sustainable on their own merits.
That's true, because at the end of the day, as much as important as these topics are, I guess business is there for profitable ventures. So if you're struggling to kind of bridge that gap between getting grants and making profit, it's hard to kind of make it mainstream. Yeah.
You've probably read my opinion in terms of the car industry right now. It's, of course, a huge transformation ongoing. And right now, maybe it's slightly slower because there's some reluctance of customers to pick up a lot of cars that are battery driven.
Yeah.
There's some reluctance right now. It's slowed down a little bit on the margin. But in my opinion, again, this is a blip in time, and we will see the emergence again of that market. It will be growth market, and it will be an enormous growth market. So this will not be stopped.
Right. Do you feel like in every new invention, there's always new innovations in an industry, there's always areas where there's kind of a blip, and then it has to overcome that blip to kind of get to the peak?
Okay, major inventions such as the internet or technology or sustainability have an enormous growth initially, and then some questions come, and then they blip slightly. There's slightly a turn down, and then it turns around again and grows enormously. Look, in the early 2000s, we had a lot of internet companies. A lot of them were very successful, very valuable, huge names. Very few survived, but the ones that survived became huge today and are some of the largest companies globally. That's true. The same will be with battery-driven companies or cars and so on that are battery-driven or relying on battery technology. That will be, the electrification will not be stopped, not because these blips in time. It will continue. That's my strong belief.
That's very interesting because, you know, some people might look at, for example, the electric car market right now and think that the batteries aren't going to last that long, or there's different questions. But I feel like it's strange that if no questions are being asked about an industry, I think that's bad. I think there should be some areas in time where people question things, because then more innovation can happen to overcome these questions. Yeah,
and some of the questions are maybe not immediately with the cars or the batteries. It's maybe how you service the batteries, where are the battery sort of stations, where can you load the batteries and so on. Those are practical questions, but all that will be solved, believe me. I'm a big supporter of that. And the Nordic region is one of the regions that will play an important role in this area, renewables and so on, batteries, electrification. But there will be blips. Of course, we're seeing some right now, but that will go away over time, and we'll see a lot of successes.
Okay, I had a question about your role at the Swedish Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
I think I remember reading you said it's a place where business and politics meet. I wanted to ask your opinions on that generally, because currently it's quite relevant where business and politics have different relationships. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Okay, first of all, it's not only a place where business and politics meets, it's everything meets there, culture and a lot of other sports, a lot of things. So I took that role because I like to do things outside of my daily job. But then I also like to do things that somewhere fit in that is complementary to my daily job. One of these developments was that I took on the chairmanship of a major chamber here in London, and it was the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in this case. And it was a lot of fun. I was there 6 years as a chairman. And I learned a lot. I got to know many aspects, many individuals that I didn't know before, many companies that I didn't know before, many politicians that I didn't know before, many sort of out of the culture and so on. So it was very, very interesting.
That's really great.
It widened my horizons.
That's brilliant. I had a question about yourself. So is there anything that you look forward to doing or look forward to having in the next 5 years, professionally or personally? Is there anything that you're really excited about?
Yeah, first of all, outside of work, I'm an avid sportsman, so I like to go to a lot of venues.
Which sports, if I...
Lots of them. I mean, I grew up, I mentioned a little bit that I went to high school in Switzerland, so skiing is one sport. And then there are many, I played a lot of soccer or football as a child, but that's more difficult when you start working. You need a lot of people and so on. So all these team sports, I played basketball and so on, that you cannot do after, or it's difficult to do when you travel. So I started to focus more on individual sports, so tennis, squash, and ball sports, and that's a lot of fun, and that keeps me busy. But in terms of what I still would like to do over the next few years or in the immediate future is maybe be part even more of the sports community and so on and so forth.
Okay, brilliant. I had another question about your life. Is there a specific role model or someone you look up to, maybe if not now, but when you were kind of growing in your career? Is there someone you looked up to? Was it maybe a sports person or someone in finance or anyone at all?
No, I think everybody has strengths and weaknesses and strengths, and you always look up to people who are strong, and I exaggerate here a little bit, but are successful. So it was not one person. I like the diversity. It's a little bit with my personality. So it's not one individual or one sort of set of people. It was many. So I look at all these individuals and try to adapt and listen. So I try to learn from them.
Brilliant. I had a question about what success means to you. So obviously there's two ways of answering this, professionally or personally, but I was wondering if you had any definition of what success means to you and whether that's changed over your 30 years at Deutsche Bank, for example.
I mean, to be a happy person, for example, to be self-content and like what you're doing, that's a sort of success for me.
Okay.
And being and sort of, I mean, it's no material gains. Of course, that's important in one way or another, but overall, it's more the happiness and being content.
Okay, great. And is there a way that you would recommend people to kind of measure that? Because I find it hard personally to, how do I know if I'm happy?
Because you have to do something that you like and that you're fun. I, for example, look at you and you like this interview. Right. As an example.
Okay.
So I can see that's something you should develop, and you spoke how excited you're about that. And that's a little bit for myself too. I try to do things that I like and try to combine it then with other things and do complementary things. It's very difficult to do opposite things all day, and then you're sort of struggling with time and so on. So do things that come naturally to you and where you have fun. That's important. Happiness.
So would you say that one of the questions I wanted to ask were what are one of the biggest mistakes you see young people doing nowadays? Would it be to do with the fact that some young people might choose a career that, you know, like we mentioned, that their peers might recommend them to do or force them to do in a way, and then they kind of see the disconnect between their work life and their personal life? Or are there any other mistakes that young people would make that you've seen?
One sort of trait I notice amongst young people is the pressure is enormous, has always been enormous with schooling and so on. So that's nothing new today. It was always like that.
Did you also have that?
Yeah, of course, massive. It's always been there, but of course, one always thinks that's more now than it used to be, but it's a lot. And I think the trait that I think most people challenge with, and where I like to see a difference, is how you deal with issues, how you deal with failure. Right. It's very easy. What I notice amongst young people is, like yourself or others, you come to Imperial, you're number one in your class, exaggerate a little bit again, but you're a top student. And then when you're at school here, if you don't like a course like psychology or mathematics or whatever it is, you know it's over after a certain amount of time. Or if you don't like a professor or something, you just choose something different if you don't like a major. When you're in the office, suddenly you're in an environment where you cannot just choose not to do things because you're set in a vertical, in an environment. And it's not that easy to exit that environment because it's not always your choice. And then these individuals who are very qualified, come to our institution, and they come with other qualified individuals into a group. And then they notice that there are certain traits that one person is maybe promoted slightly quicker.
Right.
Or this is happening or that. And then I often have conversations, can I deal with that? Because this person was promoted and I did this and this. And I would think you have to detach yourself from that. There will always be people who are better. There are always people who move faster. There will always be people who have a different career path. You will always see that. But when you come in there and you've always been at the top, and you could always choose more or less what you do, suddenly you face that. And that often creates not just a failure on that specific topic, it also is if sometimes people take the shortcut and just try to exit their career path and then do something else. And don't do that too fast, because it's not always very easy to find another place, another sort of home for yourself. And I've seen that many, many times. So think about it and then go around and try to find the right way for you.
That's really useful advice. I think for me personally, that's really useful, because I think something that you're right, I've kind of struggled with a little bit, is that at school you're always used to kind of being always successful and never walking into an exam where you don't know what to do, or never walking into a situation where you don't know what to do. You're normally in that bubble where you're doing well. Yeah,
learn how to deal with failure. That's important. That's an important trait. And the other aspect is when you're at university, you often see the big picture, like when you study something.
Right.
You see how society works. You see how a company works. You're always a little bit taking a helicopter view. I'm trying to make a point here. And when you come to work in the office, it might be the opposite. You might be bottom up instead of top down.
Right.
And at university, you've learned it the other way around, because you take a global view. In class, the books are written to make a global point, often, not always, but often. So it's important to learn how to deal with these aspects, because success has many fathers, but failure doesn't.
Wow, that's really meaningful. Yeah. Just on that point, so one aspect I kind of got from your point is to deal with failure, that you have to kind of detach yourself from what everyone else is doing and detach yourself from, you know, the average, the common path, and be happy with where your direction's going. Is there any other, maybe another tip that you could give for how to actually detach yourself from failure? Because I feel like it's easy to say for myself. It's hard to kind of put it into practice.
Yeah. Take a distance from the day-to-day life, so work. So don't become obsessive with work. You have a long life. You have a lot of issues to deal with, and take a step back and look at it also from a sort of with a humor. Okay. This is what happens, and sort of develop that. So because if you take it too seriously, this failure will be very difficult to deal with.
Right.
And take a step back and say these are always situations that happen, and also take the element of fun into the equation.
Okay, brilliant. That's really, really important.
And also think if somebody else gets promoted, I'll just take that now fictitiously here, be happy for them, because maybe next time it's your turn.
Exactly.
Because in the long run, there are many sort of avenues that you can take, and maybe next time you're the one who's promoted and everybody looks at you.
Definitely. On that point, do you have any advice on, let's say there's a 20-year-old student who's just entered finance, and everyone knows how important networking is, but it's kind of hard to put yourself in that position. Do you have any advice on kind of connecting with different people and being respected or being humble in a work environment?
I mean, be open-minded, meet a lot of individuals, but if you focus on the job that you're doing and the environment, it comes automatically.
Okay.
The environment comes to you. And if you go towards the environment, it also comes to you. So do it both ways a little bit. Try to be the best possible person in that specific situation.
Okay. I have a slightly different question. Do you know, many people say that happiness is not related to money. Do you believe in that? Do you think that most people who say this have reached the point where they've earned enough money and then they say, actually, looking back on my journey, I should have detached myself from gaining the material possessions?
Okay.
Is there
the material possession is one aspect of many.
Sure.
And when I say you have to be a well-balanced person, try to develop all aspects.
Okay.
And the financial aspects are one aspect of very, very many. but it's not the only one. And you need to develop other skills and other sets of values and so on and so forth. For some, material things might be valued more than for others.
Okay.
It depends a little bit how you set it up. But nowadays, I think you can excel in many areas, and the material areas are not that important.
Okay, brilliant. I had a question about books. So how do you stay inspired and curious each week? Because you must be so busy, but do you get a chance to kind of read books or podcasts, or how do you kind of learn?
Of course, I read lots.
Okay.
Lots of books, lots of podcasts I listen to, and also newspapers. So I keep myself enormously à jour of what is happening.
Right.
But normally, I like more real stories, sort
Okay.
of documentaries about people, about
Biographies,
history, and so on. That's what I normally like. That's just personal myself, and I'm not the person who reads all these fantasy books
Sure.
and so on. But that's just a personal trait.
Right.
Since you asked me, that's what I read.
Is there-
Right now, I read a book
I was gonna...
by about Leonardo da Vinci, for
Oh,
example. And then I read a business book the other day, also biography about Elon Musk, for example.
Oh, brilliant.
So I try always to keep current what people are doing and so on. So one is a book about somebody who lived in the 15th century and the other one in today's century. And these happen to be quite two recent books I read.
Wow, that's really interesting.
And by the same author, so that's interesting too.
Oh, wow. Is it the author who also wrote the book on Steve Jobs? Walter
Yes,
Isaacson?
I think yes, that's exactly the person.
Yeah,
And-
because I really enjoyed Steve Jobs' biography.
Yeah, and that's, for example, very interesting. That's a good one. I agree.
Do you have any? You just mentioned Elon Musk, and it kind of sprung to action in my head. So obviously, yesterday he launched and he actually landed one of his rockets using the metal hands, as it were. Do you have any thoughts on his journey? Because obviously, like you're saying, he's been criticized a lot, and he keeps on going. Do you have any thoughts on Elon Musk as a person?
Well, he has achieved an enormous amount of things,
Sure.
however you define it.
Definitely.
So my view is you have to be a specific individual to reach those that level of entrepreneurship. And so I'm all positive on the developments and what he did yesterday here. It's of course not only him, it's
the
also
whole
it's
team.
a huge SpaceX is a huge company. And in my opinion, SpaceX wouldn't be as prominent today if not the fact that the Obama administration sort of outsourced the certain aspects of the technology and so on to third parties, and SpaceX was one of many.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. That's a good take. I had a few quick fire questions before we wrap up this interview. So it's just random questions I've just thought of, and I think people would be interested to hear about. What's the favorite place you've traveled to for work?
That's a very good question, because I like all places since I try to always see the positive in every sort of country that I visit. And it's a difficult one. I wouldn't know to say that one country or one city or one region.
Maybe the top three?
No, but I like them all. They are very different.
Okay.
They're very different. So it's because I like basically all countries and all continents, and so I'm not that person who has one favorite. I don't have a favorite city or a favorite country, but there are of course many that I've been to, and also maybe one aspect that I have to mention here when you ask me where I've traveled for work and what was inspiring, and that was when the Berlin Wall fell and Eastern Europe opened up. I worked for a while in Eastern European corporate finance at the beginning. And Deutsche had acquired Morgan Grenfell, and there was Deutsche Morgan Grenfell and so on. And we had one division, or a major division, that dealt with Eastern Europe, or the former Soviet Union at the time. And that was very interesting because you visited then cities that are very well known, but that were very different from ours. Today, they were similar. And this is one thing, how fast Europe has developed. When I first visited Warsaw, Prague, Budapest, just to name three, but even many, many others that are further east, and how they looked at that time and how they look today.
Now.
And even I was initially in cities like Dresden for business. At the time, Deutsche Bank developed all of the eastern part of Germany very quickly. And I was part of that task force. I worked in Germany at the time. And we developed that in a corporate finance type of way too. And then I visited Dresden one of the first days or first months after the wall fell. It was unbelievable to see that.
Gosh.
And to see how fast this has developed, that gives me a lot of hope for the future. How these cities looked, the cars that drove around, the restaurants and so on. That is unbelievable how things have changed. If you go there today and you were there at that time, and it's not that long ago, 2-3 decades ago, and that has developed. So if you ask me, that's a journey. And every time I go back, I always think about this. Wow, how Europe has developed.
That's really interesting. A next quick fire question was, if you could have dinner with one person in the world, who would that be?
You. No, but it's a difficult question because I always look at everybody as a positive. So I don't want to sort of discern between individuals. But if you ask me, a group of individuals, I like normally to sit at big dinner discussions and so on. So I would say I would look at the topics, and I would like to sit at a dinner where you discuss the future of the world in a positive way, because I think there's too much negativism everywhere, and I want to see positivism. I always see solutions and try to find solutions. I'm not at all as negative. When I go to conferences, everybody's so negative. And then you see that there's a lot of positiveness out there because I mentioned the development of Europe here. And of course, everybody's critical of Europe today, but I exaggerate here a little bit again, but to make a point. But overall, I like to see the positive aspects and the positive developments and so on. And I always hear at conferences all the problems that are around. So I think we should change the topics often. It's easy to criticize, but it's more difficult to find solutions and talk positively about that specific situation.
Definitely. I think I'll quickly exit the quick fire for a second. And I had a question on Brexit, for example, where, like you're saying, many people have negative opinions on what's happened post-Brexit. And you're saying you kind of look at the positive parts of every situation. Have you had any thoughts about how the finance situation has changed post-Brexit and if there's anything that we could look forward to?
We can look forward. London has been around for a long time. The UK has been around for a long time, and it will be around for a long time. So I think Brexit is a blip in time. I don't even discuss it anymore. You have to look for solutions, and I think London is doing the right thing. It's a very active city now. It's fluid, lots of people around, and please note that London will remain a global financial center. And it will, and I see lots of positivity here and lots of development and so on. So my view is it's there to stay, and Brexit is, in the long run, not a major event.
Okay, that's really nice to hear. I had another quick fire question, which is, what is one app on your phone that you couldn't live without?
The news apps. Those are the ones that I go to every day or every minute. Sort of, it's about the markets, what's happening, and so on and so forth. So I like that. I like to be current. But it's interesting. When I started working, and this is what I'm saying, their information was power.
Right.
If an important individual came into a room, there was always that element of new information. Today, through the apps and so on, information is available to everybody, all age groups, nobody who it is, cultures, it transcends everything. And that whole aspect of mysteriousness has disappeared. And that's why sometimes so when you go to major events, it's not as interesting because there's not that much news, because the news is on the apps.
It's everywhere. Social media has taken that and put it in everyone's hands.
Yeah, and that is an interesting aspect, I think, of the whole sort of development, because and I notice also that some of our young students that come in from universities like Imperial are so fast in finding out what's happening in certain aspects, and it's always a pleasure to see that. And that aspect has gone away from where an important individual had the power of information. Now it's basically the cloud, the internet, the apps.
That's really interesting. Yeah. What are your thoughts on social media generally?
You know what? I'm quite positive overall. Then I think it's a lot of like always in these things, some aspects you like, but I'm not a negative or positive. Everybody has to adapt to it.
Sure,
You have to take your own decisions, what you want to be part of, and so on. So I'm not negative at all, but I think everybody has a right to look at it or not. Right. So I'm open-minded in terms of that.
Definitely. I think the last question I just had was, you're talking about the news, and many people wake up in the morning and check their news. So I wanted to ask, you're obviously incredibly busy every day, the whole week. You're traveling lots every week. How do you start your mornings? Do you wake up and read the news first thing, or is there something you do in the morning?
First of all, I wake up very early because I like to be well informed. So you're absolutely right. I look at all the TV apps and so on, all the newspaper channels, and I'm pretty well informed quite early. So I like doing that.
Okay, brilliant.
And answer emails and so on. So I do that early.
Okay, and then does your morning routine normally involve exercise, or is that just whenever you get time?
Yes, not every day. I travel a lot, so it's not always time. But I try to do it 3 or 4 times a week. I'm quite active exercising. And that's an important aspect because you have to sort of look at the holistic picture of yourself and keep fit and so on and so forth. So that was my point. Work cannot take over all areas and all aspects. That's not good.
Brilliant. I think just before we ended the interview, I wanted to ask, is there any question, if you were in my position and you had to ask yourself a question, was it something that I'd missed and you'd like to kind of add?
No, I think, first of all, I think in your position, you have to make sure that you graduate here, that you get summer jobs that are interesting for yourself. I think that's an important aspect.
Right.
And what many people do, they miss the deadlines as students. So I would argue and I would advise you not to miss any deadlines.
I have applied to Deutsche Bank, waiting to hear back. Fingers crossed.
Fantastic. That's good news. So that's great. But it's sort of the simplest thing. So don't miss those, because nowadays that's very difficult since we live in a computer-generated society. If you miss one of those deadlines, it's not good. And don't rely on sort of the immediate stakeholders for help in your career.
Okay.
Rather look at everybody.
Right.
Because nowadays we are very, very careful with that certain... You cannot take advantage of those situations because you have to, in my opinion, the world has become slightly more meritocratic than in the past.
That's very interesting.
That's my view. So personal stakeholder friends are important. You can listen to advice and so on. But ultimately, it is what you do what you do and what you don't do that's important.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mr. Olsson, for your time. I think it's been really incredible. I've learned a lot, and I hope anyone who listens to this has also learned a lot. It's quite inspiring just to see your story from your childhood, where you were able to travel a lot and experience different things, and how I can actually see how you've taken that flexibility and you genuinely apply it in your everyday life. I think it's something I'll try and do in my life, and hopefully it's inspired someone else.
Thank you very much for being here at Imperial. Great that you have this studio here, and looking forward to spend a lot of time here in the future and also see many students from Imperial join Deutsche Bank. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.